welcome to another Beer Ladies podcast. I am Lisa. I am your host this week, and I am joined by Thandi and Christina. Say hello, ladies.
Hello, hello.
Hey, and we are very excited because this is our very first sponsored episode. So we would like to give a big shout out to McHugh's off license and McHugh's online. We'll be hearing a little bit more about them later, but they were nice enough to send us some lovely, lovely beers. So when you hear the "what are you drinking" that we're about to do, these are all going to be from McHugh's. We're really excited. We're really grateful we sent them around. But before we do that, we do want to say thank you so much for continuing to like, subscribe, rate, and share. We are at Beer Ladies Pod on most places, at Beer Ladies Podcast on others. I think a lot of you know the drill by now. But again, we really appreciate you continuing to like, subscribe, do all of the things. It really, really, really does help. And now, before we dive into the episode content, again, we want to say, yay, thanks again, McHugh's. And what are you drinking, ladies? So Thandi, let's start with you.
All righty. Well, McHugh sent us a bunch of autumnal beers. So, something really for the season. And the one I've chosen for today is a Mahrs Bräu. Well, that's the brewery. It's called E.T.A. It's a Dunkels.
We love Dunkels.
Don't we just?
Mm-hmm.
So I've not even had one sip yet. So I'm just going to have a sneaky sip and I'll tell you how it is, but I'm very excited.
Lovely color.
Oh, guys, we love Dunkels. Oh my goodness. And it really is the season for them. Delicious.
Absolutely. Wonderful. And Christina, how about yourself?
So yes, from McHugh's, I'm drinking a Scotch ale by Oskar Blues. It's Old Chub is the name, and I think it was originally out in 2015. So this is a beer that's been around quite a bit. I'm really enjoying this. I'm just getting flashbacks because one of the first beers that we brewed with the Ladies Craft Beer Society of Ireland was an 80 Scottish shilling. I believe it was 80 Scottish shilling. And this is meant to be a Scottish strong ale. So it's like coming in at like 8%. And it is really, really, really nice. And it is kind of perfect for the season, as like Thandi said. Like it's a really it's a nice, like a bit of a cold fall day with the leaves coming down kind of a beer. So I'm really enjoying this.
Wonderful. And yeah, just coincidentally, Oskar Blues is one of those American breweries that I happen to live in the couple of places that they didn't distribute to. So I've never really had a chance to try them before. So looking forward to trying that myself too. Ironically, I have to move to Ireland for it, but here we are. So all good. And I have the West Kerry Brewery, which always a fan of their stuff. And sometimes it can be a little difficult to find, at least in Dublin. But I have the Carraig Dubh, which I hope I have said reasonably correctly, but it is their handcrafted traditional porter. It is absolutely delightful and again, very autumnal. Porter is very much kind of the beer of kind of the Halloween season for me too. Just because again, living in Pennsylvania, there was a lovely hoppy porter that we used to get every year from Trogs called Dead Reckoning. So this is not a hoppy porter. This is very much, straight arrow traditional porter and absolutely glorious. So thank you again to the lovely lads at McHugh's, and we'll be hearing more from them later. But again, we're talking autumnal, we're talking some of those dark nights, we're talking about, again, it's part of spooky season. And we were all saying before we started recording, we feel like this episode is haunted. We've had things go missing. We've had weird things just, not quite work out. But, here we all are. So this is really part 2 of our haunted pubs and breweries, but this time we are focusing entirely on the island of Ireland. So we're going to start off with Dublin, talk about some of our local or local to us haunted pubs and pub adjacent maybe buildings. But just to sort of kick things off, I think, Christina, you had a couple of good ones and I've got some funny little ones. But yeah, if anyone want to share some of the weird stuff that happened as we began recording, we'll go from there.
Yeah, well, I'm actually quite prepared for this. I've got my Ghostbusters t-shirt on, so
nice. Wonderful.
I'm sort of ready to go. So I guess to kind of kick off, like talking about how haunted this episode is. So I was actually able to go home for the first time in 2 years. Thank you, COVID. And my mom had gotten me this lovely picture book called The Parting Glass, A Toast to the Traditional Pubs of Ireland. And it features a couple of the haunted pubs we're going to talk about, namely the Brazen Head and the Gravediggers. Now, the reason why I think this book is haunted is because every time I go to find the mentions of these pubs in the book, I can't find them. But I have found them before, so I know they're in here and they're listed in here. And yet, for some reason now, it escapes me. So I'm convinced that the book is haunted.
Fair enough. And I was saying, just as we got started, my Apple Watch told me I had burned exactly 666 calories so far today. So again, we're on the dark side, folks. So we've got some dark beers to go with it. All good. But I guess, Thandi, you and I are both relatively more recent transplants to Dublin. What kind of stories have you heard about Dublin, haunted Dublin pubs? I know I've got a couple, but I'm curious which ones they tell us kind of newcomers, I wonder.
You know that when I was looking around for this, you find lots of articles which tell a lot of different tales and stories. The ones that really stood out were the Brazen Head and Gravediggers. So if we're talking Dublin pubs, what I seem to what seems to be the case anyway, at least with the Brazen Head, is that there was a person who was part of the rebellion and was hung there at around 1803. And it's said that his headless ghost haunts the Brazen Head and has been sitting in the corner watching the door for enemies, which is a delightful idea. If you were a skeptic, it might be a reason to avoid the Brazen Head. But every tourist who ever comes to Dublin is told to go to the Brazen Head because it is a beautiful old pub. And actually, if there was ever going to be a pub that was haunted, I would think it would be the Brazen Head. It's weird. It's got lots of nooks and crannies and lots of spaces. So if there was ever going to be a place, gosh, maybe I'll haunt it one day when I'm dead. Because if there isn't a good ghost sighting, well, we can change that in the many years until I die, hopefully. But that was supposed to be Robert Emmet, who was an Irish patriot and used the pub to plan some rebellion in 1798. So how's that?
I'm always a little suspicious when you have a celebrity ghost, just because, it's not your sort of standard, and we'll get a little bit more into this a little bit. It's not your sort of standard, man in tweed or knocking or, playing with doorknobs, that kind of a thing. It's how do you know it's him? Is it, he doesn't have the head. So yes, that could be him, but he's probably not the only headless guy wandering around. So I don't know. Christina, you look like you want to say lies.
No, I was just going to put the Brazen Head in a bit of context because people talk about it being sort of this really, really old pub, and they date it probably way, way earlier than it actually was in existence. So as the historian in me can't help herself, so she's just going to provide a little bit of context, which will actually probably tell you that it probably is haunted by any number of things besides Robert Emmet. So we have excavations at Bridge Street Lower, which is where the Brazen Head is on from, and these excavations were in like 1989. So we do have some data from this place, this where the Brazen Head is now. So there, by the 14th century, there were some houses along Lower Bridge Street, and it was now within the city walls. It wasn't the case earlier on, and it was named after, having a bridge, very, kind of obvious. But our first reference to a pub or an inn called the Brazen Head is in 1613. So in 1613, there was a fine given to Richard Egan and his wife on, quote, one massage and garden called the Brazen Head in Bridge Street in the city of Dublin. And so Timothy Dawson has argued that it likely existed before this, and he approximated the date to somewhere in the 16th century, so the 1500s, possibly the earliest reference to a place called the Brazen Head. But the excavations on Bridge Street in general do reveal evidence of an inn. We do see sort of pictures and things that we could possibly, that date earlier even, 13th century pottery, these sorts of things that possibly tell us that there was an inn on premises earlier. But an inn, not a pub. They're very different. Well,
what's the difference, Christina?
An inn is some place where you can stay. You can have food and drink. A pub is much later. So, I mean, an ale house would kind of be more likely to be kind of in the same, when we're talking about these really early inns, we're more talking about like ale houses and taverns. And an ale house is could literally be someone's house. It could be that, you know, Bridget down the street was brewing today and hey, come over and have some ale. It could be something a little bit more permanent depending on where it is in the city. Taverns in particular probably served wine, also possibly ale, but definitely wine, possibly more of an emphasis on wine. And this is really context specific and these sorts of things, but there is some evidence on Bridge Street. Now, this is Bridge Street in general, not necessarily at the spot where the Brazen Head was, that there was some kind of an inn possibly based on the pottery deposits and things, and that this could date somewhat back to the existence of the Brazen Head. But again, this isn't necessarily the Brazen Head. It's not necessarily, you know, associated. It could be someplace else because, of course, you know, lots of things to do in a 200-year span. But the moral of this story for our topic of ghosts and haunted places is that this street in general, and indeed Temple Bar and all of those surrounding vicinities, are quite old. And so there's probably quite a few spooky spirits wandering about, maybe a bit lost, maybe popping in for an ale or two, just used to that place. Because of course, Bridge Street had a lot of pubs, or had the inns, and then we have Wine Tavern Street, which of course was famous for its taverns, and so places where people could drink, and we're probably still wandering around now trying to find that drink that they've been dying for eternity, so to speak. So yeah, probably haunted. I'm not sure if it's Robert Emmett or not, because as Lisa said, if he doesn't have a head, how are we entirely sure that it's Robert, unless he's telling us that it's Robert, which could be the case. But definitely some people wandering about.
Absolutely. I always like it when headless ghosts have the courtesy to be carrying their head in the crook of their arm. I think that's, thank you, everyone. So that's, you know, it's just courtesy, you know, just think about that. But another story I found, and I think a pub we have better evidence of the dating for is Mulligans of Poolbeg Street, founded in 1782. And I think we have a license and all of the things we should have. Though again, could be wrong about that. But what I like is they have what's a kind of proper, I will say, modern ghost story, where they've heard the bangings, they've had, you know, sort of cold spots, all of those things. They don't go into orbs, which is good because I have a problem with orbs. I'm like, you didn't have them before people had camera phones, people. It's not a thing. Stop. But what you do get them a little bit before when they're digital cameras, but again, not a thing before. So I don't want to see your orbs, not here for that. But they have a good kind of apparition story of going into the cellar. And of course, the cellar is a liminal space, and it probably is older than the rest of the pub, may well have had other, you know, may have been the foundation for another building, all kinds of good, creepy stuff like that. It's already colder. You may get some infrasound, all of the spooky things. But there's a quotation from the book about Mulligans, where the barman in question had gone down. He said, I felt kind of something was watching me. So I turned around and I looked down, and there was a man sitting on a keg at the end of the cellar. He wasn't even looking at me. He was looking straight ahead as if minding his own business. I just felt cold. And of course he's like, nope's out of the cellar, and, you know, goes back and there's nobody there. But I love that kind of, there's just a guy in a room that's meant to be empty. So, you know, it doesn't say whether he was wearing, you know, equally modern dress, if this was, you know, some dude who just crept into the cellar, or again, it seems like he just disappeared. But I do like that kind of thing where there's just suddenly someone where they shouldn't be. So definitely my kind of ghost story. But also a little bit nicer too if they're kind of moving pint glasses around and all of that good stuff. But I think too maybe a good segue to get into talking about the Gravediggers, because we all love the Gravediggers. It is a wonderful, wonderful pub and has every right to be haunted. So I think, again, probably Christina, tell the folks why.
Well, yeah, Gravediggers is one of my favorite pubs in Dublin and actually in Ireland, and just full stop. The Guinness is amazing and just the staff is wonderful. I just love the Gravediggers. Full stop before we get into it. So the Gravediggers, of course, is, as the name might suggest, right next to, and I mean literally right next to, the Glasnevin Cemetery or Prospect Cemetery. Like right on top of, if you're not familiar with Dublin, like literally basically built into the walls. Yeah. It's so called the Gravediggers because, of course, the Gravediggers from Glasnevin would come there for a pint. And many legends abound about that. But of course, you know, being right next to a cemetery with over 1 million souls. Of course, some of those might have decided to pop over for a pint on their internal journey thereafter. So there's some really interesting stories about possible people who might haunt this place. And one of them is, as Lisa said, just an ordinary guy in tweed who hangs out, has a pint, and then just simply disappears. So just that kind of a lovely, heartwarming kind of ghost who just kind of hangs out, enjoys the atmosphere, has his pint, and then just pops off.
Vanishes, yeah.
And then there's actually also, I think I read about some sightings of an Edwardian woman in white. And so I was going to say to Lisa to throw this back to you, because the concept or the legends around the woman in white are quite prevalent and across folklore. And I wondered if you knew a little bit more about the women in white and where that kind of comes from.
Yeah, it's bits and pieces. You also have gray ladies. They tend to be more in Germany, although you find some in England too. You also get the odd green lady. Now they tend to be much more associated with what looks more like fairy folklore now, because green, of course, the fairy color. So, there's just that sort of direct connection. But yeah, white ladies are interesting because they do tend to be associated, not always, but often, with a specific family. So she's often a family ghost. So very different from, an Irish folklore where you would have a banshee who's going to be like, doing all the screaming before someone's death. Again, they are very much family spirits as well. But your white lady is more just kind of wandering around. Her appearance may mean something, or it may not. A lot of them tend to be kind of the sort of anniversary ghost, if you like, too. They will appear on the anniversary of either their death or some other significant event in the family. So again, there's still a lot of variation in that, but they do tend to be very sort of cyclical, if you like, when we're talking about your white ladies, gray ladies. They have a pattern and they stick to that. They don't just suddenly sort of rock up and start conversing with people or doing something outside their usual jam. They just kind of waft around in their own sort of trajectory. But again, very, very interesting. And there's a lot of really interesting work that people have done on them, but they all kind of just do their own thing, but they do tend to be, again, very tied to one family. So
why are ghosts always ancient? From the 1700s, 1500s, 1400s, etc. Why aren't we having a ghost that, somebody that died 10 years ago and is just actually not over it? And
that's
is
fair,
sitting there with their ghostly smartphone, wondering what on earth TikTok is.
Exactly.
I mean, I think that they definitely exist. I think perhaps our imagination is more captured by ghosts that are historical, but I absolutely think that, ghosts of anybody who kind of wants to stick around for a bit is around. It might also be like the nature of their deaths. Like some people might have had more traumatic deaths, which might have been more of it depends on the like it might be associated with a historical event. And so that's why they're kind of hanging around. Equally, we know that there are many still awful things happening now, so people could still be hanging around from that. But yeah, I mean, I certainly think that there are absolutely, modern spirits. And this reminds me, I think I saw this on Reddit, as someone was like, how come there aren't dinosaur ghosts?
Right? Yeah.
Oh, cool question.
Yeah, now there is meant to be a prehistoric ghost on Cranbourne Chase in England, where he is on his prehistoric horse. He is riding away. He looks roughly Bronze Age. Now, thank God, an archaeologist saw him and could be like, Bronze Age. So, that's, you got to have the right person there at the right time. You certainly have Roman ghosts, things like that. But there aren't enough Viking ghosts knocking around here. You'd think that someone would have come up with some by now. So, it's an interesting question. But when it comes to just kind of the structure of at least your fictional ghost stories, M.R. James, the great ghost story writer, was talking about how they had to be X amount of time in the past, but not so distant that it couldn't resonate. So, he was writing a lot of them in the sort of 19-teens, 1920s. He would set them in the Victorian period because for them, that was only, sort of 30 years before. So it was still distant enough that people would have remembered that, would have lived through it, but would have had, that sort of hazy, kind of bit of shimmery memory there as well. Although it's an interesting thing, and we could go off on a long tangent about this, about how ghosts text people, modern ghosts call people on their cell phones, pop up in Zoom calls, and there is a long history of ghosts and technology, just kind of where those two things intersect, and whatever is the most current technology is always something that becomes kind of almost kind of a sort of lightning rod, if you like. There are new stories about that. So even when the telephone was brand new, they'd be up calling people. So it's a whole thing. I've got a great book on it, but well, probably have about 6 great books on it. But my bookshelves are sad and creaky. So.
Well, and just to say before we move on that as a very lifelong horror fan, there's a really good film out there called Lake Mungo, which kind of explores the idea of like a current event ghost, someone who is very much haunting her own family. And it's a really interesting, sad, somewhat scary story. So I highly recommend that. I think it's on Shudder at the moment.
Okay.
Or Netflix, in one of the
How
two.
would you want to haunt your own family?
Well, there might have been reasons.
Okay, yes, that's true. There might have been reasons, but if presumably if you didn't love them, then fine, haunt them and taunt them and do all the things. But gosh, that would be like the last thing I'd want to do is go and scare the living bejesus out of the people that I love.
Right. Absolutely. I'm going to do two more very quick Dublin ones before we move on to other Irish pub ghosts. So the Lord Edward is meant to be haunted by Lord Edward Fitzgerald. Again, another 1798 rebellion sort of involvement there. But again, is it related to that? All of those good things. And again, right next door, the Bullen Castle is haunted by James Clarence Magnan, the poet and laudanum enthusiast, but he was born there. So it was, his family home. So he is meant to sort of, again, pop up and make things cold. I don't think people see him. It just gets cold and they're like, oh, he's at it again. So, doing all that stuff, but yeah.
And then maybe one more. I don't know the specifics of any of the ghostly stories, but there was a pub that struck me, and that was Darky Kelly's. Have you guys heard of that one?
Yeah.
Right. So it's close to a Christchurch Cathedral. Jeepers. And what was interesting to me about it anyway was that it was the site where they found a whole bunch of bodies. So it was thought to be, let's say, run by a known madam. Her name is her nickname was Darky Kelly, who owned a brothel on the street. And it's thought that she was one of the first serial killers in Ireland, thanks to 5 bodies that were found under the floorboards. So if there was going to be a haunted place, that would be a good place, wouldn't it?
See, that's one for me. That's Carolyn, who does the podcast with us, Carolyn, and I did a dark history tour of Dublin, and they talked about her and the pub on the tour. And then I came home and I tried to Google and find information about it, and it seems to be really couched in a lot of myth and folklore and what's actually true, because the first mention, I think, of her, because she was, according to the lore, burnt at the stake for being this serial killer, but then the first mention of that is quite long after her death. And you might correct me on this, Lisa, if you know a bit more about it, but it seemed to be one of those things that, is it true? I wasn't convinced that it was. It seems to me that the first reference was, and I'm really, really pulling this out of nowhere because this has been a while, since 2 years, maybe, or longer, 100 years or some quite far after her death. And so some modern historians are kind of like, well, we don't know if that's necessarily a thing, or if that was true, or if this is just meant to bring whatever onto the pub that is, or just someone made it up because historical people, much like people do now, fake news, and they just make things up because it suits them to do so. Or they heard a story and think it's fact, but it's just someone kind of, messing with them, or, something like that, completely, full of nonsense. So I'm not convinced that this was actually a thing. What do you say, Lisa?
I think definitely the burning thing did not happen. No, just did not happen. First of all, that was just not a big thing in Ireland. A couple of exceptions, but nothing like the rest of Europe. And I think you would have seen that, especially because I think she was meant to have lived in the 17th century or very early 18th, somewhere in there. So again, we would have heard about that. There would be records, there'd have been even newspapers, all kinds of stuff like that. But I think it's entirely possible that she was a madam and very successful, and some people didn't like that, maybe. Yes, maybe she was getting kind of above her station, or that kind of thing, because I think there are other rumors then about either abandoned babies, or all these different stories that don't quite hang together, but all kind of fit in that context. But Yeah, and then there's the whole serial killer angle where it's like, wait, we've had all these different terms that just kind of associate with one person, but it sounds like, maybe she was a very successful businesswoman for her time. It'd be interesting to find out more about the real her. But yeah, if someone's haunting the pub, all well and good.
Yeah,
So-
it could have been a post-mortem character assassination. Like she could have just did her thing, and then years later they were like, oh, brothels bad, so we're gonna
Bad.
write all this bad stuff. It's really hard because we're missing some records because of things and things. But I'm with Lisa. I'm just not convinced.
Yeah, although I think just in the general area there is also meant to be a tunnel from where the Underdog is now over to Dublin Castle, and there's meant to be shenanigans over there. But again, we don't know. But hopefully by the time you listen to this, maybe the Underdog will be coming back open soon. Fingers crossed, we hope. But we'll see. So I know we have to move on. We have other tales to tell outside of Dublin. But before we do that, we want to have a little pause. We're having a real sponsor break. So we're going to take a little break, hear from the guys at McHugh's, listen to some stories about the refurb they've recently done, how they're really making sure that the beer gets to everyone in tip-top condition. It was fascinating to discuss with them. So we will take a break for a sponsor. And when we come back, more ghost stories from across Ireland.
Everybody, we are super, super excited to introduce our very first sponsor on the Beer Ladies podcast. And today we are talking to Cahill from McHugh's. McHugh's off license. And we're going to be talking about the fact that McHugh's has gone through a recent revamp. And there's some exciting changes in the store on Malahide Road specifically that we want to draw your attention to, as well as a discount and a special deal for anybody going there before the end of October. Tell them that we sent you. Let's see how many we can get in there. So Cahill, tell us about your store. Tell us about McHugh's, how it started, and why you've gone for a revamp now.
Okay. Well, we're a second generation family business, and so my father would have started business in 1956 in Drumcondra, and then in Artane in 1962. And myself and my brother took over the business in the 1990s, and we opened up 2 independent off licenses in 95 and 96. I guess we saw a trend in the market for more, a desire for more specialist products across beer, wine and spirits. We opened our first independent store in Kilbarrack on the Kilbarrack Road. And then a year later, we took over what was Kelly's on the Malahide Road. We've been there since. So I suppose we've always tried to be at the cutting edge of the business, always experimenting, always trying to put our best foot forward. And I suppose in the cycle of reinvesting in your business, 2021 just fitted it. Our layout had become a little bit maybe tired. Our branding needed a bit of a shake-up. So we made a big investment in 2021 to revamp the store and to rebrand also.
What are some of the changes that you made to the store in terms of layout? And I mean, I think you've mentioned to us privately that there's bigger craft beer fridges. So it sounds like you've got loads and loads of stock.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, we've a huge amount of stock. I mean, it's, no matter how many fridges you put in, you could never fit in the amount of craft beers that you'd like to fit in. So look, we've got a 7-door cooler for ciders and mainstream branded beers, etc. And then we'd have 5 meters of open deck fridges for craft beers. We then would have quite a large ambient section as well for those beers that you don't want to refrigerate. We went from a 2-meter fridge, a 2-meter and a 1.5 meter, and now we've got 2.5 meter fridges. And like I say, they're open deck, which I think suits craft beers. It allows people, just like wine, craft beer shoppers like to pick up the can. They like to read the back label. There's often beautiful art on the front label. So, open deck kind of facilitates that browsing.
Yeah, so I see you've got over 100 different Belgian beers and 80 different German beers. So, I mean, for those who are looking for that kind of variety, definitely stop into McHugh's there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We'll look after you. And if you need a chat about the beers, there's always somebody on hand to chat, because the customers love to engage about it, you know.
Yeah. So now, can you tell us about the in-store sale that you've got? So in your store on Malahide Road, and it's going until the 31st. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I suppose we completed our revamp, but we really want to kind of shout about it now, get people in through the door. You know, if there's people that maybe had been in with us previously and maybe we've fallen off their radar, or we want to shout out to the world if they haven't been to us before. So one thing is we're, you know, putting out social media, leaflets, whatever, to tell people about our revamped store, but also to encourage people to come in through the door. We're knocking prices down, so there'll be a lot of great craft beer offers, there'll be a lot of great wine offers, spirits offers, again special, you know, focusing on Irish products. So I suppose watch this space, watch out for social media, watch out if you're within a couple of kilometers of the store, watch out for an old school leaflet coming through your letterbox.
Fantastic.
It'll all be revealed.
That's great. So let's tell our listeners then. So for those in Dublin and surrounds, I mean, the store is at 25E Malahide Road in Artane in Dublin 5. You can also find McHugh's online. So it's McHugh's online on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and the website is mchughes.ie. So for those who are not able to walk through the door, you can go and avail of all of the range online, which is incredible.
Yeah. And, you know, like we revamped our store during the year, at the end of last year, we revamped our website. You know yourself that websites can become tired and they need reinvestment as much as anything. Yes. So if anybody up to a year ago was on our tired old website, please come and visit our beautiful new website. It's a great platform that the guys are after creating for us.
Wonderful. Well, that's it. So everybody in Dublin, go and flood the store, please, with all of your craft beer requests, and go and chat to the lads and see what deals you can get from them there at McHugh's. Thanks, Cahill. That was really great.
And we are back from our break. And we will say, if anyone else is looking to sponsor us, we are more than happy to have a chat. We've got a rate card, all of those good things. We're very, very professional. So do reach out, and thanks again to McHugh's, because we really appreciate the beer and we love working with you guys. It's really, really nice to, you know, have that closer relationship with other people in the local beer community. So we also want to talk about ghosts in pubs outside of Dublin. So there's, you know, Ireland may be a small country, but there's a lot of pubs and a lot of them are old. So we got ghosts. So ladies, what have you heard?
Well, let me tell you about Keitelers. Now, I don't know the full story, and I know that Christina is going to bring a lot more history to this, but I just thought it was really funny, okay? Because I was, as one does, losing time and brain cells on TikTok today, and there is a creator on there who goes around, I want to say the world, but really Ireland, and talks about these interesting places that have got a interesting history. And it caught my attention because I didn't know, when he was talking about Keitelers, the pub, I didn't know that it was supposed to be haunted. But when I was starting to read about different pubs and all the listicles in the world that you can find, it came up, and I thought it was so neat. So it comes down to, it's a pub in Kilkenny. So that's number one. It is seemingly ancient, so something like the 1200s, that's where it was established. And now, Christina, please fill me in, but it sounds like this lady got married 4 different times, and every single time she kept building up her wealth. So she already had money to begin with, and then every time she married, her husband would die, she'd inherit, she'd grow and grow and grow in this wealth. By the time her 4th husband was looking really ill and sickly, people were starting to get a bit suspicious about this whole thing and started accusing her of witchcraft. At least that's how the story goes. So after a bunch of kind of scandal, it seems like she escaped over to England, never to be heard of again. But her, was it her maid or it was somebody in her service, was hung at that very pub, according to the legend. So again, I don't know if it's true, but that's the story I heard and read about today. Keitelers in Kilkenny, so that would be great to hear about.
Okay, so the real history, if we will, about Dame Alice and her inn. So I'll start with Alice because it's a really interesting story, and it's sort of the first case of witchcraft and heresy, or heresy that ends in execution in Ireland. And there were no statutes in Ireland about witchcraft, so she had to be tried in an ecclesiastical court, of course, which Alice very greatly objected to. So Alice was quite a powerful woman. She was born in a powerful family, and she married subsequently powerful men in Kilkenny, within her context. As a result of this and her accumulation of wealth, I won't go too much into detail. The Irish Spirits podcast actually did a really good episode in detail on Petronella and Alice, and so I highly recommend that. But I will just do a brief overview. So this is in 1324, which is the Kilkenny witchcraft trials. So we're talking about, this is when the trial sort of takes place. And the main sort of antagonist against her is the Bishop of Ossory, Richard de la Dread. And he was quite a controversial person in his own lifetime. He started a lot of fights with a lot of people, accused a lot of people of heresy and all sorts of things, and ended up creating quite a few enemies from here and there, one of which, of course, is Alice and her son. So Alice, as Thandi said, did in fact marry 4 different men, 3 of which had died by the time that this sort of trial started, and 1 who was sick. So their families did accuse her of sort of murdering their fathers or brothers or what have you, through sorcery and heresy and consorting with demons. And so Richard le Dread, along with these people, brought charges against her. And again, I'm not going to go through the ins and outs of everything. Alice, this wasn't the first time Alice had been charged with doing something kind of shady. She was not a stranger to being on the wrong side of the law, if we'll say that. But equally, there's not like a lot of evidence that she was murdering her husbands left, right, and center. We are talking about the 1300s, so it is quite possible to just die of illness or anything, really. There's not really any evidence that she sort of aqua tofanaed her way through her husbands. And if you're not familiar, that's a reference to a poison that was used to kill husbands or abusive people in people's lives. So I do have sort of some of the charges, and I'll in my notes, so I kind of can talk about what she was charged with. Basically, she was charged with denying totally the faith of Christ and the church for a year or a month. She apparently gave demons sacrifices of animals, and then she scattered these out at a crossroads, specifically to a demon called Robert Artisan, who was apparently one of the poorer class of hell. So she's not even, sacrificing to an upper echelon demon. She's just going whoever's around, basically. So she sought counsel and answers from demons as well, apparently. She had apparently meetings in cemeteries and all sorts of things. She used various parts of animals, including horrible worms, herbs, nails of dead men, hair, brains, and clothes of unbaptized children, which she boiled in the skull of a certain robber who had been beheaded on a fire made of oak sticks, and she made potions and ointments and candles of the fat that was in that skull.
That's just being thrifty, though. I mean,
yeah. And she's actually one of those people we talked about, the Alewives and Witches episode. We talked about the idea of people using potions on broomsticks, and she's sort of accused of oiling up a stick to travel here and there. One I think was the really interesting thing is it said that she swept the streets of Kilkenny every night, raking filth to the sun's door whilst murmuring to the house of William by some, give all the wealth of Kilkenny town. So, that's kind of interesting. So anyway, she was charged with these things. She fought them off, and she kind of was able to escape the first time. And then the bishop was charged for doing things that he really shouldn't be doing. And then Alice was charged again, and this time successfully. And she is awaiting trial. But when she's doing this, of course, remember that Alice is really, really wealthy. Mm-hmm. So Alice just, absconds with herself leaving sort of Petronella to die in her place. Unfortunately, Petronella, the whole sort of trial maybe had a bit of a turning point because Petronella unfortunately was tortured, and she ended up confessing that she was a witch and naming all of these other people in the trial, which was sort of kind of this really big turning point. But anyway, so Petronella de Meath is left. And this is quite controversial. Why did Petronella stay? Why didn't she escape with Alice? Someone has argued that it's possible because her daughter Basila went with Alice, and so she stayed to protect her daughter, so her daughter was able to escape. I'm not so sure that seems satisfactory because, of course, she could have just escaped with her daughter. Who knows? Anyway, Petronella did stay. And so Petronella was flogged through the streets of Kilkenny and burnt at the stake. Which is just really horrible. And I think it kind of talks about how, poor people always and continue to bear the brunt of the accusations for the wealthy, because this, of course, was absolutely a trial and the whole point of this was to get Alice. And of course, they couldn't have Alice, so they executed Petronella, poor Petronella, who was innocent and certainly was not conducting, all of these sorts of things that she's alleged to have done, and was just sort of bore the brunt of, these sort of battles between really wealthy people. And I think that is something that we still see now, and we've seen throughout history, that the poor pay for what the rich have done. And it's really, really sad. And so some people now say that it's the ghost of Petronella that haunts the inn. Now, if we're going to talk about the inn itself, it didn't exist as an inn in Alice's lifetime. So it was called Kittler's Hall in the time of her life. And we do have some archaeological evidence that it, of course, existed before Alice and after that sort of thing. But it wasn't used as an inn, according to like Irish archaeologists, until post 1449. That's what I've read. But certainly wasn't an inn during her lifetime. It was just Kittler's Hall. And that's not to say that people didn't stay there, because, if you're big and wealthy, people might have stayed at your house and things like that. But like as an inn,
yeah,
that's a later development. And as the inn kind of itself, it was really, really redone in the 1600s. So kind of what we're looking at today is really dating to really that point, although there are still some earlier features and that sort of thing. But it's not quite what people make it out to be. Although I would certainly imagine that if Petronella is still hanging out, she probably is haunting there. And my heart just really goes out to Petronella. I just feel really of all the I read a lot of historical stories, and her story and the story of Gormla, who was the wife of Bräu and Bräu, both of them just really, really stick out to me about how they've been really maligned in their lifetimes and maligned later. And it just really, my heart goes out to poor Petronella.
I know. And shout out again to Irish Spirits Podcast, who have a great episode on this. It's called Petronella's Garden. They make a cocktail in her honor, which is delicious. Highly recommend. But again, I would say similar to the Brazen Head, it's that kind of, I'll say oldie worldy pub if you go there, and it has a lot of those nooks and crannies. Parts of it again are legitimately old, and then there are parts that are kind of like, we're old, and so it's a mixture of things, which is fine. Parts of it can be pastiche, and parts of it are again legitimately old and kind of damp, and all of the things you associate with that. So definitely worth a visit if you're in Kilkenny. But it's definitely like there's a mix of things going on there, and you're absolutely like, Petronella is the one who we should remember, and not all these other people who either had their say or kind of just took off. So
yeah, I mean, it's there was a really interesting art piece that was like, it was a feminist art piece about women who'd want to eat dinner with, and one of the places that was for Petronella de Meath. And I think that's really wonderful. And I think we really need to do more as historians with bringing forth the stories of, the people who aren't kings and aren't queens and aren't like at the higher echelons, because we lose these stories about poor Petronella de Meath, and who really deserves to be remembered for the horrible things that happened to her.
Yeah,
and for just being a person.
yeah 100%. So I know, a bit of a downer there, but I'm sure we have some other stories from outside Dublin that are just kind of maybe fun hauntings, or they don't even have to be fun, they can just be dark, they can be hauntings. But what do we got?
Well, I mean, there's lots of if we're just talking about old pubs, like we talked about on the first episode, like honestly, there are so many just really, really old pubs, like Sean's Bar, which says it's like the oldest pub in Ireland, or one of the oldest in the world. I mean, it's not like, it's a situation with the Brazen Head, but it's still old, so it's probably haunted. And even as Thandi is saying, like, there's still modern ghosts. So like really we could be talking about anything and everything being haunted. Any pub that you go into anywhere could just be haunted.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I read one. I have this. It's a Yates. Yeah, so there's a particular hotel that's meant to be haunted, and apparently Yates saw the hauntings himself, and he saw like groans and doors close and all of these other things. The name is escaping me at the minute, so I will have to.
Is this Renville Hall? Yes.
Renville House. That's
yes, that's the one. That's also supposed to be quite haunted. So that's really
in Galway.
Yes, so we're outside of Dublin, and this just all makes me want to go on like a tour of all the haunted pubs in Ireland. But I think like that's just like living here, right, and going to a new pub every day, because they're all probably haunted to some extent.
Absolutely. I'm going to Cork soon, and apparently there is some good CCTV footage of ghosts coming in and doing the the typical knocking pint glasses off the bar, that kind of thing, at a pub kind of right in the city center, Coughlin's on Douglas Street. So maybe I'll have to go check that out, because this, let's see, what's a good word for it? This very floridly written article suggests that I will have a good time and maybe see some ghosts in this old pub, which it says has been a hostelry in one way or another since before the famine, includes rooms that were once a doctor's surgery and mortuary, tick, and at least built close to or on the site of, so I like the non-specificity there, on the site of at least 2 medieval cemeteries at what was nearby St. John's graveyard. So, not just pint glasses, but apparently gin goes flying. So like, from the top shelf too. So they're throwing around the expensive stuff. So this ghost apparently has some notions, I think people might say. So maybe I'll go check that out when I'm there.
Well, you would have thought by now that we would have realized that creating and building things on top of cemeteries is always just really a bad idea. Like I thought that we kind of have figured that out, but apparently not. Maybe just stop building things on top of cemeteries, friends. But then I think if you're around long enough, everything is a cemetery.
Well, yeah, especially around here. Yep. Yeah, you've only got so much space on this little island, so.
Inevitably someone has probably died everywhere you go, which is kind of a depressing thought, or liberating, I suppose.
Or liberating, yeah. So I think we'll begin to wrap up, but I think, one of the things I think is like, one, why are there not more Viking ghosts? Someone maybe needs to do some investigation into that. Might also be interesting just to see if we have, some kind of Norman ghosts showing up as well. I feel like you don't even get Norman ghosts in England, and that seems weird. You should have a bunch of them.
It might be because, as my friend said, Dr. Stephen Hewer, and he's gonna, if he listens to this, he gets really angry when people call them the Normans in Ireland, because by their own language they were the English at that point in time. So maybe it's because we're calling them Norman ghosts that they don't show up. They want to be called English ghosts. So maybe we need to talk about English ghosts. And yeah, in terms of Viking ghosts, like I live near Clontarf. I'm really surprised that I'm not seeing, of course, with the Battle of Clontarf, more Viking ghosts just wandering back and forth, kind of lost and looking for the battle. Of course, it might be that they've all moved on by this point.
Maybe.
Okay. But the really serious question is, guys, if you were a ghost, what kind of ghost would you be, and how would you haunt your local pub?
Good question.
Because I think I'd be a friendly ghost. Okay, like I'd be the kind of ghost that pours pints for people, and mysteriously, leaves them there for them to drink, as opposed to causing havoc. Give people an extra round. Why not?
Absolutely. I think I might dress in the wrong period just to throw people off, because I'm presuming you have a wardrobe that you can just
have to.
It's like you're in the TARDIS and you can pick from whatever. So I feel like I might dress in something kind of 18th century, just because I feel like that's very ghostly. And again, just throw people off, and then you can be like, oh no, you got it wrong. Like still have a smartphone somewhere just slightly visible. Just keep people guessing. But I like the idea of giving away free drinks, although you want to make sure the publican is still making their money. So I think
the balance has got to be met there.
Absolutely. But maybe if you're giving away just enough that it brings the punters in, I think that's not a bad thing. I don't know. How about you?
I'm with you, Lisa. One of my life goals is in death to be someone's archaeological thesis by making the most bizarre and strange grave known to man, and actually to get a group of people together to do it all over the world. So somewhere down the line, some archaeological PhD is going to be like, okay, like 500 years ago across the world, 25 people did this. We don't know why. And there really is no reason besides for the laugh. So if anyone's interested, let me know.
I love it.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, ritual. So yeah, similar lines, Lisa. I'm totally down to be the ghost that wears like medieval costume, but then speaks like a very modern language with like modern like meme culture and slang and like stuff like that, and just confuses the heck out of everyone. That sounds kind of lovely. I think those sort of ghostly encounters where everyone's just a little confused as to what happened, but no one's really kind of scared is really what I'm kind of going for as a specter.
Absolutely. See, good. We've got plans, folks. So just saying, keep an eye out. So wonderful. Thank you, ladies. And thank you again to our friends at McHugh's. We have really enjoyed these beers and we are so glad to be working with you guys. So with that said, again, continue to like, subscribe. It really does make a difference. We really do appreciate it. And we will see you again next week. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.